You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello, once again, to another journey into the unexplored, the unexplained, Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson. Is somebody there?
Yeah, I would hope you're here.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm doing this all by myself, having a hallucinogenic fit. But anyway, this week's show, we did a show a few weeks back called True and Freaky Stories. And now we have some interesting ones, also obviously of paranormal nature. So we're calling these Unsolved Paranormal Mysteries. So they all have paranormal themes, but most of them are not solved to this day.
And let's face it, we're never short of true and freaky stories.
No. In fact, every week is a true and freaky story.
Mm-hmm.
But these are interesting in that they're similar because they're haunted houses, and there's different experiences and things to deal with them, that they are sort of mysteries as well.
Mm-hmm.
Hey everyone, Eric here. I am the host of the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Join me for a new episode every Wednesday as I delve into the unseen world with historians, authors, researchers, and investigators as we try to understand and make sense of the paranormal. You can listen to past and future episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or at unseenparanormalpodcast.com. Please like the show on Facebook and share with your friends. And remember, some of the scariest things are unseen.
So I'm going to go ahead and start us out here. The first story up is the Wyrick House in Ellerslie, Georgia in 1989.
Very recent.
Very recent. Heidi Wyrick is a gifted psychic with the ability to see and communicate with the spirits of the dead. And since she was 8 years old, she'd been able to see ghosts. And it began in February 1989 after her parents, Andrew and Lisa Wyrick, moved to Ellerslie when she started seeing the friendly elderly apparition of a man named Gordy who played with her on the property. Now, Lisa thought this figment was an invisible friend, but eventually Heidi encountered another spirit named Con, who appeared at the front door in a t-shirt with blood all over it. When she told her mother she thought someone was trying to kidnap her, Andrew searched the entire neighborhood for someone who fit the description, but came up empty-handed. Eventually, Lisa happened to mention Con and Gordy to her sister, who had just bought the house next door. And as it turned out, a man named James S. Gordy was its former owner. It had once belonged to Catherine Ledford's family, and Lisa got in touch with her. She verified that James died in 1974. James Gordy. He owned a real estate company in Columbus, and for many years he was a Sunday school superintendent at Ellison Methodist Church. And although she had no photographs of him, she corroborated Heidi's description of him having gray hair, wearing a suit, tie, and a shiny black shoes. Heidi began looking through them and picked out Catherine's uncle, Lon Con, bachelor. He died in 1957 of cancer, but he had lost his hand in a cotton gin before when he was 20 years old in Ellerslie, just as she had seen him. For the next 4 years, she continued to have encounters with benevolent spirits of James Gordy and Lon Bachelor, both of whom had been long dead. Now, in 1993, so this would be, 4 years later, Lisa became pregnant and an evil spirit came to visit. Heidi had never been scared of anything, she recalled. She'd never been scared of Con. She'd never been scared of Mr. Gordy. But when she saw the dark figure in our hallway, she was hysterical. She and Andrew discussed moving, but the likelihood of Heidi seeing spirits elsewhere came up. Her baby sister Jordan was born on February 3rd, 1994. 2 weeks later, Lisa noticed deep gashes going down Heidi's face. Andrew just assumed she had inadvertently scratched herself during the night, but 2 nights later, he too woke up with a searing pain from 3 claw marks going around his side. It was believed the scratches were being caused by the dark entity that Heidi saw. Now, noted parapsychologist Dr. William Roll investigated the Wyrick house at their request. He visited the house in September of 1994, and one of the first things he accomplished was to have Heidi identify Mr. Gordy's picture from the photo lineup. She was able to correctly identify him. Having spoken to Heidi and her parents, I'm even more convinced that we're dealing with genuine parapsychological experiences, he reports. Then the question comes up, why are these things happening to this little girl? Now, Heidi is now a young woman who no longer lives in the old family home. She reports that she has not seen Mr. Gordy for years. However, she continues to see the mysterious dark figure, as well as numerous other spirits. The sightings are so frequent that she now takes them in stride. No explanation has ever been made for Heidi's visions. Sadly, Andrew Wyrick, Heidi's father, passed away in 2012, and he was 45 years old.
It's pretty young.
That is.
Now, if Heidi Wyrick is around, I'd like to have her as a guest.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd be able to get a hold of her. Yeah, that would be interesting to have her on as a guest. I'm curious about this dark figure she has continually seen since then.
Well, you know, children are very sensitive, and I feel that children are sensitive to the astral realms, and they're sensitive to the dream world. And it could be that she was a born sensitive, and she's just had to deal with that all her life, and she hasn't been able to shut it off.
Yep. Well, it's not something you're going to ever be able to shut off.
No, not at all.
That's the thing about any kind of paranormal instincts you have or experiences.
That's right.
And I think they happen more to people who have them and accept them and are okay with them. I think they continue. I don't know. Maybe that's the deal. When someone has a paranormal encounter and they're so distraught and they get, a priest to exorcise them, they drive them out, and maybe the spirits or whoever around them says, you know what, this person can't handle this. We're going to move on. We're not going to try and talk to them anymore. Maybe that happens. I don't know. I'm guessing because no one has the real answer.
So apparently nothing terrible's happened to her. She just has continued to observe and see these spirits appear to her.
Yeah, just not the ones from her childhood, but she continually sees other spirits and then this dark figure, of course. So so obviously that's kind of weird, that knowing this dark figure's around you this whole time. Yeah,
and their house looks just like an ordinary family home. Yep. But then that's there's a long history in Georgia, so who knows what the home was before the modern home.
Yep, but it sounds like they're not weren't evil or mean spirits.
No.
Mr. Gordy and the other guy. So it's just she has an ability. That's all there is to it.
She was able to pick up on it.
Yep.
Yeah.
But she probably wants to know what that dark figure is. I bet you she still does.
Yeah, or who knows, maybe by the time this article has been written, maybe she's already figured that out. Who knows?
It could be.
Yeah. Now, this next one takes place in Placerville, California, which is very closer to home here.
Yep.
And these people, their names are Christine and Nick Skubish. That's how you pronounce Skubish, yeah. And this took place in 1994. Now, on June 6, 1994, 23-year-old Christine Skubish and her 3-year-old son, Nick, they were driving along Highway 50 in the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California when they vanished without a trace. She was a single mother who recently earned her paralegal certification, and she was also hopeful about marrying her son's father. She left her family home near Sacramento on June 5th, 1994. She was headed for Carson City, Nevada. She was reported missing on June 8th by Dave Stossenbach, her stepfather, who called the police to make a missing persons report on her disappearance. An investigation began on the case, but no leads initially turned up. 5 days after Christine and Nick disappeared, a woman named Deborah Hoyt and her husband were driving along Highway 50 late at night, and the two were singing to keep themselves awake. Suddenly, Deborah saw a naked woman laying on the side of the road. The woman's face was towards the road. She was laying on her side. Her knees were slightly bent. She had one arm underneath her head and the other arm on her head. The Hoyts were dumbfounded. They thought it might have been an obscene practical joke or a trap to hijack their car. They stopped at the nearest phone booth to call the police. Within minutes, 2 cruisers were at the site where Deborah had seen the woman's body. However, without a landmark to pinpoint the exact locations, the authorities found nothing. The next morning, someone began to suspect that the sighting had something to do with the disappearance of Christine and Nick. At the urging of their families, Deputy Rich Strasser decided to investigate further. He figured that it might be easier to spot something in the daylight. Deborah had pinpointed a particularly dangerous stretch of Highway 50 known as Bullion Bend. As Strasser drove in the area, he noticed a child's black tennis shoe on the side of the road. On the area next to the road was a steep embankment. He decided to pull over and search the area further. At the bottom of the ravine, he discovered the twisted remains of Christine's car. He checked Christine and discovered that she was dead. He went to the passenger side to check Nick, who was laying in a fetal position. Strasser assumed that Nick had also died, but when he touched Nick's neck to find a pulse, it immediately appeared that he took a breath. Strasser immediately called for an ambulance. Nick had been alone in the car for 5 days. Police believe that sometime after 2 a.m. on June 6, Christine fell asleep at the wheel. She drove off the road and crashed her car at the bottom of a steep incline. Due to the incline, motorists drove past the accident scene for days, unaware of the accident below. Oh my God, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Christine had been killed instantly. 3-year-old Nick was all alone with no way out and no one to talk to. Christine's mother believes that he spent the time talking to his mother unaware that she was dead. Against all odds, he survived 5 days of blistering heat and 4 nights of cold, dark solitude. Doctors who examined him believe that he would have had only an hour or 2 left to live had he not been rescued. The strange circumstances that saved Nick's life seem to defy explanation. If Deborah had not seen the naked woman, he would not have survived. It seemed impossible for Christine to have been the naked woman, as she was still fully clothed and wearing her seatbelt. Furthermore, Strasser believes that she was most likely killed on impact. Deborah is certain that she saw a naked woman on the side of the road. She and Christine's family believe that it was Christine's spirit who saved Nick that day. On the show Paranormal Witness, Nick, now an adult, was interviewed. He described a bright light surrounding their car following the accident. He also recalled seeing the figure of a woman standing near the road. He believed that his mother was watching over him following the accident. Also, it was mentioned that Christine's aunt had several dreams about the accident before Christine and Nick were ever reported missing. She saw them laying in their car in a ditch, and she also saw the number 16, which turned out to be the number for a mile marker near the accident site. Oh my God, that's freaky.
Isn't that an interesting story, though?
That's very interesting, and I think they should have paid attention to the aunt. It was a warning dream.
Obviously, Christine didn't pay attention to her aunt if she kept telling her, "This is the dream I'm having, and you shouldn't go." Obviously, she's moving. She wants to get married. She's starting a new life.
Right. It was a warning dream, and wow.
Yeah,
I mean, if she had paid attention, she might still be alive.
It's interesting. The kid says the car was surrounded by white light, and that there was a woman standing by the road. So it's interesting that the person that found or that spotted them spotted the naked woman, and that obviously that's not Christine. Maybe it was someone else who had an accident, and that's someone else's spirit. Could be someone who's close by.
Or
them.
It could have been her spirit, and it could have been her spirit in agony, and her spirit was warning them.
But naked.
You never know. People, it's the way, but you never know though the way people picture themselves, when they're feeling vulnerable.
Yeah.
So. Who knows how you picture your spirit?
Or it's somebody watching over them anyway.
That's true, too.
And then they were trying to get someone's attention, like come down and help them, at least help the kid.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was an interesting story.
It's really sad.
That's like one of the classic style of ghost, where a ghost helps solve the mystery.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
I mean, it's solved, but it's unsolved too. We don't really know an explanation for why there was a naked woman on the side of the road, but then there was nobody that was naked. So it's
Yeah.
kind of weird.
So the kid's alive now, and he's had to grow up without his mother. That's
Yep.
what a traumatic experience too. What a memory.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So this next one is about the Tallman House in Horicon, Wisconsin, from May of 1987 to January of 88. So we're talking a little over half a year. In early February of 1987, Alan and Deborah Tallman, or Debbie Tallman, brought home a bunk bed they had purchased at a secondhand shop. Now, they assembled the bed and stored it in their basement, and when the Tallmans moved the bed upstairs in May of 87, it marked the beginning of 9 months of horror for the family. Now, from the moment that the bed was first slept in, the house appeared to be haunted by spirits that terrorized first the children and then the entire family. The children, who were rarely sick before, suddenly became ill for no apparent reason. The night that the family moved the beds upstairs, their son Danny was in the room next to it. After his parents said goodnight to him, his clock radio apparently took on a life of its own. It turned itself on and randomly switched the channels under its own power. He reported that he saw the radio's vindicator moving itself. However, his parents did not believe him. A few weeks later, Alan was painting the walls in the basement when he went up for lunch. He placed the paintbrush on the table, and when he returned, the brush was in the bucket with the bristles sticking up. When the youngest daughter was sleeping in the bunk bed, she claimed she had seen a red-eyed witch behind her door. She also claimed that she saw fire in her room. A month later, Danny saw the same thing. The family pastor was brought in, and he felt the presence of evil inside the house. The Tallmans continued to be tormented by the entities. Doors would bang open and shut. Strange voices would call out nowhere, and ghostly visions persisted. And a week before Christmas, Danny again saw something horrifying and told his mother that he wanted to leave. Frustrated, Alan told the spirits to get out of the house. He then said that if he wanted to fight someone, they could fight him. Now, 3 weeks later, at around 2 a.m. on January 7th, 1988, Alan returned home from the late shift, and outside the garage he heard an eerie howling sound. He went to investigate, and a voice came out of the howling and said, "Come here." He went around to the back to see if anyone was there, but there was no one there. He then went back to the garage and saw that it was on fire. He went inside to get a fire extinguisher, but when he came back out, the fire was gone. The garage door was undamaged with no visible signs of recent fire consummation. When Alan got back inside, he went to reach his lunch pail that he had set down, but the entity then threw it across the room. Alan started sleeping in his daughter's room to provide protection, and one night a fog appeared around him. A voice came out of the fog that said, "You're dead." Debbie then called the pastor because of what happened to Alan. A few days later, Alan was working late and asked a relative to watch the girls. His relative was a complete skeptic until that night. The same horrible figure seen by the children appeared, and he let out a loud scream. Debbie then told the relative to get the kids together and that they were leaving the house forever. 2 weeks later, the Tallmans had the bunk beds destroyed. Afterwards, the Tallmans had no further paranormal experiences, and in April of 1988, a family moved into the Tallmans' old home and have had no haunting experiences. The actual house itself had no apparent history of hauntings. Horicon, Wisconsin is a small farming town of just 3,800. It's considered a safe and prosperous place. The Tallmans moved into their house on April 13th, 1986. The Tallmans' family pastor, Wayne Dobratz, visited them shortly after the hauntings began. He believed they were victims of the devil. He was certain that a demonic presence was in their home, and he found no evidence that they were fabricating the incidents. The Tallmans were beset by unwanted attention as a result of earlier ghost hysteria, which they did not seek out. They turned down a lucrative tabloid offer about their experience, as they did not think it was right to make money off their children's misfortune. The Tallmans agreed to share their story, and as it was told also on Unsolved Mysteries, under 3 conditions: that they were censored during the interview, their children's names were to be protected by an alias, and that all the reenactments of their experiences be done by actors playing the Tallman family. The Tallman House activity was described in greater extent in the book Haunted America by Michael Norman and Beth Scott, but no time in their research did they link the hauntings to the bunk bed. The activities instead linked to beyond the property, as being located on or near a former Native American burial ground. So there you go.
Oh, so then that explains it, that last part.
Well, seeing fire, the howling.
The lady with the red
Yeah,
eyes.
the lady witch with the red eyes.
Unhappy spirits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's quite a lot. But if the family that moved in after them didn't have any experiences at all, what does that tell you?
Well, who knows? Maybe the spirits were at peace finally. That's the only explanation I could think of.
Yeah. But I know a lot of people believe in haunted objects, in this case, bunk beds. I don't personally buy into a haunted object because it has no true... I mean, Native Americans say everything has an energy.
Sure.
I don't think an object can be haunted.
Unless the bed was in a particular spot that was like an energy spot.
The spot, but I'm saying the bed.
The bed themselves, yeah.
I know a lot of people are terrified of haunted dolls, and we've
Right.
done shows on
Yeah, right,
haunted
we
dolls,
have.
but I don't personally buy into haunted objects at all. I think, again, it's like voodoo. You give the power to the haunted object.
Right. And I don't either, but I can say that there are some objects where you can feel energy, because I collect antique books. And sometimes when I'm opening the book and I see a bookmark or a flower or something that they put in there themselves, and sometimes when I see even the inscription of the person, I can feel that person from that
Yeah.
book when I'm touching the book.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean that it's been
But to me, that's more paranormal sensing on the object
sensing. Yeah.
than
But
it is the actual object itself being possessed.
that's
or
true
haunted.
too. And that's true.
But I guess if you want to look at it in a different way, if the object gives off something to you, I guess you could call it haunted. But the question is it a different type of haunted than it is a malevolently haunted object?
You know what else I was wondering about, and this is something that I didn't think we talked about in our last in one of our shows where we talked about curses. There is such a thing called a generational curse.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if the family had some kind of I don't want to say generational curse, but if they had some kind of generational psychic hauntings or psychic problems.
Maybe it's a cycle.
That was following them, and then the cycle was broken, and it didn't follow the new family because the new family didn't have that when they moved into the new house. When they moved into the house,
Yeah, it's hard to say. There's so many.
it's just a thought,
We know there's so much we don't know that it's hard to tell what we do know.
right?
All right, you want to go ahead and do the next one? This next story I think is fascinating.
Yeah, this one took place in a cemetery in Crosby, Texas, Black Hope Cemetery, and this took place in 1982. So in 1982, Sam and Judith Haney were one of several couples who purchased homes in the Newport area of Houston, Texas. A year later, when Sam went about having a swimming pool dug in his backyard, an elderly man showed up at his door to report that he was about to dig up human remains. The reason he knew the remains were there was because he had buried them years before when the land was still a cemetery. So I guess he came to warn them, hey,
Yep.
guess what, there's bodies there.
Yeah, hey buddy.
Yeah. Proceeding to dig, it was not long before Sam came across two bodies just where the old man said they were. There were two pine boxes, each with the indentation of a skeletal form. So Sam immediately called the sheriff and the county coroner, who conducted an official exhumation. And most of the bones had turned to powder, but 25 fragments were found, some so brittle that they disintegrated when touched. 2 wedding rings were discovered on the frail fingers of the exposed skeleton. The Haneys tried to determine the identity of the skeletons, and they contacted longtime resident Jasper Norton, who told them that he dug several graves in the area when he was a teenager. The Haneys' home and several other homes had been built on top of an African-American cemetery called Black Hope. The deceased were mainly former slaves, and the last burial occurred at the cemetery in 1939. Construction crews destroyed all traces of it during the building of the subdivision. Local research revealed that the remains were Betty and Charlie Thomas. They had been born into slavery and freed during the Civil War. They died during the 1930s. Plagued by the guilt for digging up graves, the Haneys decided to rebury the couple. Despite this, the dead would not rest. One night, Judith Haney discovered her clock glowing and sparkling. When she checked, the clock was unplugged. On another night, Sam was working the night shift, so Judith was alone. After getting a shower, he heard her sliding door open and close. She heard someone say, "What are you doing?" She assumed it was Sam, but he wasn't there. The next morning, she went to get her red shoes, but they were not in her closet. Sam helped her look throughout the house, but they could not find the shoes. So the shoes turned up outside over Betty and Charlie's grave. They later learned that the same day was Betty's birthday. Sam believes that Charlie was giving his wife a birthday present. Her red shoes, huh?
Yep.
Okay. The Haneys were not the only ones to experience supernatural phenomena. A dozen of their neighbors also reported lights, television, and water faucets turning on and off. Many heard unearthly sounds and saw supernatural apparitions. Ben and Jean Williams moved into the same neighborhood around the same time as the Haneys, and shortly after moving, Jean noticed that her plants kept dying, and reported near their flower beds, sinkholes appeared in the unmistakable shape of a coffin. They would then fill them in, only to have them reappear a few days later. The Williams also noticed strange markings on a tree near the sinkholes. An arrow pointed towards the ground, and beneath it were two horizontal slash marks. A longtime resident told the couple that he had marked the tree. He said that he made the marking because his two sisters were buried beneath it. The Williams felt guilty for practically desecrating their graves. The Williams soon began experiencing supernatural phenomena. Random shadows slid across along their walls, accompanied by whispers and a putrid smell. Their granddaughter Carly, who lived with them, reported that during the blazing heat of summer, she would encounter bone-chilling pockets of ice-cold air. It would be very, very chilly, and you just had this feeling of foreboding, or just like you knew something wasn't right. She said anywhere in the house, you'd have a feeling that you were not alone. Somebody was watching you. It terrified me to be in the house by myself. Carly recalled other strange incidents in the home. The toilets used to flush on their own. As the water went down, I could hear what was almost like conversations. You could hear people murmuring to themselves. It was a presence or a spirit or something there, something that wanted to be heard, wanted me to know that it was there. Jean also recalled another incident where she and Carly were about to take a nap. They heard the sound of the back door opening and closing. They then heard the sound of footsteps walking towards them. However, no one was there. Jean added, "I absolutely believe that all of these things happened to us because we were on the graveyard and that we were simply going to be tormented until we left there." She wanted to leave, but Ben felt that they had a right to stay and fight it. He described encountering two ghostly figures in his home as he came home from the graveyard shift. They went straight into the den and headed down the hall towards the bedroom. He entered the bedroom and saw one of the figures standing above Jean. Fearing for her safety, he jumped onto the bed and the figure vanished. However, the Williams' problems were far from over. Within months, 6 of their close relatives were diagnosed with cancer. 3 of them died. They felt that the illnesses were caused by the spirits of the homes. Meanwhile, the Haneys decided to sue the developers for not disclosing that their home was built over a cemetery. A jury awarded them $400 for mental anguish. In a devastating reversal, the judge ruled that the developer was not responsible. The verdict was thrown out, and the Haneys were ordered to pay $50,000 in court costs. They ended up having to file for bankruptcy. The Williams followed with legal action, but the developers wanted proof that the cemetery had even existed. Jean started digging up her backyard for remains. However, she soon fell ill, so her daughter, Tina, she volunteered to finish the job. After a half an hour, Tina began to feel dizzy. She lay down on her couch, but she continued to feel worse. Ben called 911, and Tina was rushed to the hospital. She suffered a massive heart attack. Tragically, she would die 2 days later. She was only 30 years old. Jean believes that her death was caused by supernatural forces. The Williams ended up losing their entire investment and escaped to Montana. Later moving back to another neighborhood in Texas. However, back in the old neighborhood, none of their current residents reported any paranormal activity. No one has been able to explain what happened to the Williams or the Haneys. Research shows that many of the bodies were buried by Jasper Norton. He told the Haneys that their home and a dozen others were built at Black Hope. The deceased were mainly former slaves, with the last burial in 1939, and as many as 60 people were interned there in paupers' graves. The Haneys decided to fight in court to sue the builder for not disclosing their home that was built over the cemetery. And of course, as we explained, a jury rewarded them $142,000 for mental anguish, but a reversal ruled on legal grounds that the developers were not liable. The verdict was thrown out, and the Haneys were ordered to pay $50,000 in court costs, as we explained.
Can you imagine having all of that happen and still
That's
have to
stressful.
fork out $50,000, all because you wanted a pool in
All
the
because
backyard
you wanted to.
in your backyard?
That's stressful. They should have disclosed that to them.
Well, I'm sure I bet you anything the developer was well aware that that was a cemetery.
Of course they were.
They just lie until they see if they can get away with it.
It's terrible.
It is terrible.
I mean, the anguish of those spirits being slaves, all they went through, and then
A white suburban neighborhood built on top of your grave.
on top of your grave, yeah.
Yeah, but we know that's common for real estate. Lots of cities and neighborhoods are built on top of old graveyards.
Now, this is why I feel that, well, they did have cameras back then, and they had Polaroids, but this is why I feel that
Yeah.
having phones with cameras is a good thing, because they could have taken pictures of what they found and presented that as evidence.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why they didn't think to do that.
You think contacting the coroner and stuff would also have been evidence of someone who witnessed it when they dug it up.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know what the court case was like. But another interesting story that no one else has had any experiences after they left except for those two families and those two houses. Who's to say?
And the records show that there was a graveyard built there, so they had to prove somehow in those archives and records.
Maybe not for an African American cemetery. Could have been off. It's kind of that.
Oh, if
this
it was
patch
a
of
slave
woods
if
that
it
all
was a
the
slave cemetery, yeah.
if it's an African American community, like that patch of woods, that's the graveyard. It's unofficial. They bury their own dead there, and if they don't have a lot of money, it's going to be small little graves that fall apart. And
Right.
time and nature takes over. Someone else comes in, buys the property, and says, "I'm going to develop it." They may see traces of the graves. They may not even care.
Well, but there had to be burial records because a lot of free people who used to be slaves and were finally free were buried there.
But that doesn't mean there was burial records.
Okay, because the records were scanty.
And if it's African American, they may not want them.
That,
You gotta think it's a different
that's true.
time.
It's a different time. That's true. Yeah.
I mean, it's sad, but it's true.
yeah.
We have another story here for you.
Okay.
It's one about the Jones house in Manchester, Connecticut in 1993. Again, this is the 90s. Mm-hmm. The Jones house was the home of the Jones family who believed they lived with ghosts. One evening in 1993, Denise Jones was preparing dinner when she heard her son Michael screaming. She went into his room and found him curled up, frightened, shaking, and screaming. He told her he saw the face of a strange-looking man smiling at him, who touched his shoulder, then disappeared. He was just 5 years old when he saw his first ghost. He claims they continued to invade his home and terrorize his family. Now, shortly after this incident, they were at Denise's parents' house when Michael began yelling again. He told Denise and her parents that a man in a picture on the wall was the same one he'd seen in his room. He was Denise's grandfather who had died 17 years earlier, and Michael had never met him. He had also never seen a picture of him before. He soon felt better because he felt that his great-grandfather was watching over him. Then he claimed that the evil spirits were in the house and they wanted to take him to their side. Denise got a paranormal investigator, John Zaffis, to investigate him and their house. He believes that Michael's ghost sightings are genuine. Another ghost that Michael claims to see is an evil spirit he calls the Shadow Man, a dark-colored man that looks like a shadow that he sees every day. His family soon realized that the evil spirits were becoming more dangerous. One night his parents heard strange thumping noises, and they went up and found his bed shaking violently. On another occasion, Denise saw the shadow of a 6-foot-tall black-colored man that walked across the wall. It was apparently the same that Michael had seen. Then Michael claimed the spirits were physically tormenting him with hitting, scratching, and biting. And John believed that the spirits were about to possess him, so Denise decided to move her family to a new house. However, the spirits apparently followed him because he was still being attacked. Denise decided that he needed an exorcism, so she contacted the bishop. During the exorcism, he saw the shadow man at the church. The bishop had him drink holy water. His family hoped that the exorcism would help, but 3 weeks later it started again. He went through 4 more exorcisms. He still sees spirits, but his family believes that one day the spirits will leave. Now, John Zappis investigated Michael. He spent hundreds of hours with the Jones family documenting Michael's sightings and tried to determine if he was neurologically sound. He also wanted to make sure the experiences were not medical related. After several examinations, John and his team were able to determine that they were not medical or psychological. John also uncovered through his research that Michael was very ill at birth, and his heart had stopped over 20 times. He believes that Michael had a near-death experience which helped open the door to the spirit world. He also believes that Michael is in a state before possession and that the spirits are attempting to take over him.
I think he's just a sensitive, and they didn't understand it.
Yeah,
And the near-death experience obviously opened up parts of his brain and parts of him that that he was able to keep all his life, able to work
Well,
with.
wherever we are or wherever we go or whatever happens to our life's essence or soul when we die, I think when you have a near death or you've died and come back, died and come
Yes.
back, you are tapping into that.
Right.
So you are closer to that. Whatever that atmosphere, whatever you go, you're tapping into that if you have a near-death
Absolutely.
experience. And I think that's what happened to him.
I think so too. I agree with
And
you.
especially if it was 20 times. So that kid's obviously got tapped in and it's not going away.
It's not going away. They just didn't understand it.
Nope. You have another one, correct?
Yeah, this one takes place in Florida, another one in the 90s, the Mann House in Lake Wales, Florida. This took place in the fall of 1991. 19-year-old Alan Mann. He lived with his parents, and he worked nights. During the day, he was often home alone, but one day he seemed to encounter a mysterious female spirit. I had the afternoon off, he described. I came home, and I guess it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I finally gotten some sleep. The figure turned away from the door like it was leaving, and by the time I got up and walked 3 paces to the door, I don't know what happened. It just turned the corner and disappeared. He said he looked high and low for the mysterious woman. Even though the doors were locked from the inside, she was nowhere to be found. He told his mother, Sandra, that he thought he'd seen a ghost, but she refused to believe him. Eventually, he married a girl named Linda, who also moved in with him. Shortly after the wedding, Sandra was watching TV with her new daughter-in-law, and they both encountered the ghosts. I had my little dog Prince beside me, and he was on a pillow, she describes it. As I looked down at the end of the couch, I saw this white smoky thing. The first thing I thought was fire, and by that time the dog had gotten up on his feet and then just disappeared. And then it just disappeared. So even though Linda hadn't seen the apparition, she was convinced that the house was haunted. Determined to get the scoop, she enlisted a friend with an Ouija board, and with Alan they obtained the name Kramer, but no one knew who that was. Alan's father, David Mann, however, remained a skeptic until one day he suddenly produced another name. I stopped right in the middle of the hall. He said, I caught the smell again, and I didn't have any explanation for it. It's like you get an idea, a little voice inside your head, like your conscience or whatever that is. That little voice that you listen to, it said, this is Isabella. On another night, Alan described Linda suddenly attacking him in their bedroom. According to him, all of a sudden she just snapped and she got this weird look. She pretty much attacked me. She was laughing. She had some weird laugh I'd never heard. It didn't even sound like her. She had this squeaky little giggle, and this was almost like an evil laugh. I tried to get away, and it made her more and more violent. And she also started putting more force on my arms. So I pushed against her, and I slammed her against the wall 3 times, and she released me. She put her head on my shoulder again and started talking and picked up the conversation exactly where she left off before she snapped. Linda has no memories of the incident, she said. That's not me. I don't have an evil laugh. I don't do the things that he says I do. That's just not my type. I am not that type of person. I don't remember. Realizing the ghost that had turned from random to dangerous, David consulted a spiritualist who told them to pour salt all around the house and keep bags of it under their beds, and even a homegrown exorcism. But it didn't work. Almost everyone in the family suffered from bad headaches, and they began to hear a whole mass of voices. The voices were dull. They were muttering with one woman's voice over the top of them, but they could not distinguish anything that they were saying. A local psychic did visit the house and named Isabella Kramer as the ghost that lives there. This was the same name that the Manns had came up with several weeks prior. So 2 months later, after a visit from a local minister, the haunting appeared to stop. Both David and Sandra decided that they wanted to move. As they were packing, Linda was cursing and swearing at the ghost when a light bulb caught fire and exploded in a nearby unplugged lamp. "I offended the ghost," she commented. There are no known records for an Isabella Kramer in the house or neighborhood. To date, no one answered about who or what haunted the Mann family. However, it has been revealed that the area was once an old laborer's cemetery, but all the bodies were removed previous to the houses, all the bodies were removed. So the Center for Paranormal Studies in Silver Springs, Florida, eventually researched the Mann house. Armed with a truckload of electronic equipment, the center's 3 founders showed up there. Andrew Nichols was one of the parapsychologists on location, and he described it as having an oppressive ambience to it, almost a depressive type of feeling. His team all began to experience headaches. According to him, Linda and Alan's old bedroom received the highest amount of paranormal activity, and they began taking Polaroid photographs, one during and one after a flux in paranormal activity. The second photograph was normal, but Andrew noticed something was strange in the first one. There was a vague humanoid shape in the forefront of the picture. It may be a reflection of some unusual environmental effect. It may be a strange artifact of human psyche, or it could be a contract with a dimension of existence that's beyond our imagination. Sandra believes that it was the shape of Isabella. So in March of 1993, the photograph was examined at Polaroid headquarters. They determined that the shape was not a result of a defect in the film or the camera. No new investigations have been done at the house. However, Alan's father, David Mann, he passed away in June 2007. He was 62. Alan and Linda later divorced, but they stayed friendly afterward. Alan later married again and had 2 children. He passed away in November 2018, and he was 46, which I think is pretty young. But that does look like a woman's figure in the picture, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's an interesting photograph. Folks, if you actually Google the Haunted Mann house, MANN, you can actually find the photograph itself.
Yeah, you have to see that.
It does look like a figure standing there. It does look like an older woman, though, like she's turning her head, like she has gray hair.
Yeah, yeah.
It's an interesting photograph. She might have been very mad. Maybe who knows how old, maybe she lived there years ago.
What gets me is the part about the wife getting hysterical, and then later it stops and she's like going back to her normal self. It made me wonder if for that moment she was sensitive and she didn't have any boundaries.
And it tapped into her.
They tapped into her. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, it could, again, if you'd want to wonder, does she have any other experiences after this?
Yeah.
Before they moved into this house that she doesn't. Some people don't make the connections.
No.
But when you point it out to them, they're thinking, well, this did happen once when I was blah blah blah. It could be. It's an interesting photograph, though. It looked definitely as a figure in the picture.
And it is interesting that medium was able to come up with the full name that they came up with separately a few weeks before.
Yeah, that's when you start. That's unusual. When you have a name, as long as she didn't know about it ahead of time. We don't know the circumstances. But,
right.
That especially, it's too bad there's no history to find to match that up.
Right.
But sometimes you can't find history to match up what's encountered. This goes with my theory that if there are spirits or whoever it is we can't see or hear all the time, they're able to move around and go wherever they feel.
Wherever they feel, not necessarily from the area.
Yeah, this one could have said, you know what, let me mess with these people for a while.
Could be, yeah.
And then moved on. It's hard to say what's really around us. We really don't know. For all the people who say they're paranormal professionals, we really know nothing.
Oh no, we're constantly exploring and trying to delve into these mysteries.
Yep. So these professionals, I love it when they call them professional psychics, professional investigators. I'm a paranormal professional. It's like, You can call yourself whatever you want, but the truth of the matter is you still don't have any real truthful answers.
Well,
Tangible.
I think you can be a professional and not necessarily have all the answers, though. I mean, a professional in the fact that you know how to look for it, you know how to explore it better than somebody who would have an explanation that they can't make sense of. It doesn't mean that you've solved it, though.
You're saying professional in the process.
In the process, yeah.
Yeah, I guess you could do that.
Yeah, because there are people who know what they're doing more than somebody who just goes into that whole thing blindly.
But I also find it unusual when some of these professionals claim, well, I've been doing this for 20 years, and this person's been doing it for 2 years. Obviously, they're an amateur, and I'm a professional.
Right. Because I think somebody even who doesn't know a lot about this stuff could probably find an answer that a professional can't.
Yeah, they may look
Yeah.
at things differently than that person has for 20
Sure.
years. Yeah, that's what I would say. Always, if you investigate, folks, always try something different. Always try things in different ways. Don't always do the same thing in the same place all the time.
And here's my advice. No matter what a professional tells you, if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trust your instincts.
Yeah,
And
trust that. Yeah.
the more you investigate, the more you realize, like we said before, you're your strongest tool.
Right, exactly.
Above all the recorders and the cameras, trust your own instincts.
Yeah, trust your own instincts and do as much exploring on your own as you can, unless you absolutely need somebody there. But as we said, you're your own best.
A good example is if you're doing, this happens all the time, if you're doing EVP sessions and you're staying in a place, you're asking questions, you're not getting any results, you play it back, you're not getting results. Sometimes you just know when there's nothing there, you're like, let's move on. Let's move on to another area. There's nothing here. I'm not getting anything here. And a lot of other investigators who've been doing it for a while do pick up on them and go, yeah, I agree, there's nothing here. Let's move on.
And here's another piece of advice. If you are getting some kind of information or messages in and you're not able to find how to connect it, don't keep trying. Don't go on a wild goose chase. It doesn't make any sense to do that.
But be sure and notate while you're investigating all the information that you get.
Definitely notate it, but don't go on a wild goose chase.
Well, you can, but it may lead you hours of wasted time.
Well, that's what I mean. It doesn't. If you're doing it and you're wasting your time, it doesn't make any sense to do it.
Yeah. So it's funny when people get names and stuff from locations, and then other people come in and try to get those same names. And sometimes they claim to, sometimes they claim to not. Again, it's spirits moving around.
And sometimes you can find names and records. Sometimes you will run across it. But if you do, that's good. But if you don't, well...
And even then, it may not be concrete evidence. It just could be the same name for someone else. We don't really know.
Could be, yeah.
But yeah, these are interesting stories. They all have different kind of mysteries. Some are graveyard, some are hauntings. I just thought they were interesting stories that we could share.
Sure. Because we never know an area of a house or something built over a graveyard, which we've had experience in that in San Francisco.
We have.
Yeah.
We've talked about that before with the Oddfellows Cemetery.
Right. You never know what kind of energy lingers around there or leftover energy from the place.
That's right. So you never know, folks. You might want to do a little history on your neighborhood and your house to make sure it was just a wooded area and not just an old graveyard that someone decided to build your house on top of.
Oh, yeah, always good to do your research, for sure.
You never know who you're sharing it with.
Right.
All right, folks, that's another episode for this week. And I guess until next week, we'll say goodbye.
So, bye. See you next week.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.